tiny virus can bring down a massive beast. Changes in a single gene can determine whether a living creature grows a whole limb or whether it develops at all. A small programming bug in an operating system can cause it to operate in a very unexpected way or not work at all. And simple formulas resulting in regular-looking sequences can start behaving completely chaotically as a result of small changes in parameters. Change one thing, change everything. Our current economic system is unstable and growth-dependent, causing massive humanitarian problems including excessive stress, unemployment, economic insecurity, and inequalities surpassing slavery, as well as constantly increasing environmental damage, deteriorating mankind's chances of survival on our planet. Quite understandably, some say that the system is fundamentally flawed and should be replaced with something completely different.
Market system of religious
the entire
belief
money structure
is at the core of the vast majority of ecological and social imbalance of the pyramid scheme.
This shit's got to go.
But for a brief moment, let's set aside our skepticism and, following Aristotle's suggestion, entertain a little idea. For the fun of it, if nothing else. What if, like a faulty operating system, our economic system had a little bug that was making it unsustainable economically, environmentally, and socially? Let's call this hypothetical flaw the root bug. What if we'd taken this bug as a natural law, like gravity, and spent the past decades fighting over which symptoms to treat and using this bug as a political weapon to get more benefits for our own interest groups on the expense of others? What if this bug and the solutions to it would be simple and almost painfully obvious if it weren't for our outdated, nowadays contradictory economic moral rules of thumb and assumptions embedded in the words and expressions we use that we fail to see past or question? What if it was all just a huge misunderstanding? And no, surprisingly, it's not money in general, interest, speculation with derivatives, fractional reserve banking, the profit motive of corporations, the central banks or the Rothschilds, or any of those popular scapegoats that are so easy to demonize due to our existing emotional associations and misleading conceptual metaphors. Sorry to have to spoil the blame game. The essence of this bug could be incorporated into a four-letter word. Jobs. Those things that every politician seems to be promising us and that seem to be somehow connected with economic growth and national competitiveness.
President Bush lost jobs.
The McGonigal government today announced they're going to be creating 4,600 new jobs.
Jobs created and lost under Bush
Imagine
and
how
Obama.
many jobs could be created.
I had to create a lot of jobs to make that money.
Making life easier for job creators.
It's a small jump from job creator to the creator.
We are going to see a jobs holocaust.
Destroying millions of jobs.
Millions of our neighbors' jobs.
80% of the jobs get destroyed.
More jobs for construction workers, more jobs for teachers, more jobs for veterans, and more jobs for long-term unemployed.
Green jobs.
Good. Middle-class jobs. The American Jobs Act. Urgent need to create jobs, plan jobs. Jobs.
Talk about jobs.
For a job. Jobs.
More general jobs.
Pick our jobs.
Oh, what we wouldn't do for jobs. The prime argument of any lobbyist and the main objection to any environmental regulation or other societal innovation. In today's world, you can argue cutting down ancient forests just to avoid layoffs of forestry workers. Why not the death penalty to allow executioners to keep their jobs?
Avoid committing our country to any emissions reduction protocol. Job creation has to be our #1 priority.
Jobs. Things composed of work. The whole capitalist system with its fiercely competing companies aims at eliminating waste, unnecessary work, and thereby giving us more with less. Of course, people can choose to prefer more over with less, but why are we now so desperately wanting more work? During the Industrial Revolutions, economists and futurists predicted that in the 21st century, people would hardly be doing paid work at all as a result of increased productivity. Machines would do most of it for us, and we'd just do the inspiring bits we like. We'd get more and more with less and less until we get everything for nothing, a process which Buckminster Fuller called ephemeralization.
Once the androids start doing jobs, we don't have to do them anymore, and we get freed up from drudgery and toil.
But have we been moving even towards such a world? You really couldn't say so. So, what went wrong?
What could possibly go wrong in this new machine, right? Well, great, hang up, flourish, go home.
Every time the amount of work decreased, there suddenly didn't seem to be enough for everybody to get to participate in it, and some people were left outside the whole market system. Unemployment, with all its nasty side effects, emerged. And what was worst about it was that any unemployment seemed to be feeding itself, resulting in depressions and economic collapses. John Maynard Keynes was one to draw the conclusion that this was simply because there wasn't enough work, because there wasn't enough demand for products and services.
What Paul has emphasized is the problem right now is lack of demand, lack of total demand, and that means people are not buying as many goods as the economy has the capacity to produce, and that leads to unemployment.
And an underlying idea in the policies suggested by many economic schools has since been maintaining sufficient aggregate demand, finding ways to get people or the government to spend and invest more and more and more, or alternatively, try to remain competitive enough to be able to indebt other nations further and further, and so keep the economy growing at least at the rate productivity grows, to keep the system running at its full production capacity. But have we ever asked, why is work, labor for companies and earning opportunities for employees, quantized into these jobs? Why is the unit of work a human being?
Jobs, labor, labor.
We're going to transition into an economy that is very productive, but that just doesn't need a lot of human workers.
An assumption that has been there ever since the first words of Adam Smith's foundational work on economics.
So it's just a simple change in assumptions, and this is, of course, what always is fun in economics. Just take a standard model, you change one assumption, and you see what the consequences are. All the standard results got destroyed.
If the amount of work available depends on how much people spend and invest, as Keynes cleverly showed, then doesn't unemployment and an absence of desired economic growth just mean that earning opportunities, work, aren't allocated to people according to their willingness to spend and invest? That supply does not meet demand on the individual level when the total demand for labor drops. Shouldn't it be everyone's personal choice how much one wants to specialize in one's own line of work and buy goods and services produced by others? In other words, how big a part of the economy one wants to be.
The top 5 regrets of the dying. Number 1, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. For many people, this means I wish I'd spent more time with my family, with my kids when they were growing up. Number 2, I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends.
Even the neoclassical growth model, despite being a very rash simplification, accepts that the marginal utility of free time, its added value to a person, might surpass that of additional products and services, and that the trade-off between purchasing power and leisure is a matter of personal preference. If you'll excuse a slightly provocative analogy, how is the whole debate over whether the economy should grow more or less or degrow a more relevant public debate subject than, say, whether people should have more or less sex? Even if we could show a statistical correlation or even a causal relationship between the amount of sexual activity and people's happiness, shouldn't it still be a matter of individual preference and not a public policy issue, as long as we prevent abusing others? Similarly, shouldn't one's amount of economic activity, human interaction that is kept account of in monetary terms, be a matter of personal choice as long as one does it sustainably and without indebting others or imposing costs on them against their will? Regardless of whether we want less or more of a kind of interaction, shouldn't our first priority be getting rid of our possible dependence on a constant increase in or a set amount of such interaction? An addiction or other form of desperation does not improve one's negotiation position in getting it or the quality of the outcome. Alcoholics seldom have the best parties.
Yeah, the droids are taking our jobs, but focusing on that fact misses the point entirely. The point is that then we are freed up to do other things.
To open up fresh perspectives for economic research and public discussion, which are currently gridlocked between interest groups and fanatic devotees of different economic schools refusing to even try understanding each other, let us present the root bug hypothesis, questioning a couple of our most restrictive assumptions. The hypothesis is split into 3 parts, all of which deserve to be assessed separately before weighing the possible costs and benefits of fixing the bug against each other. The why part of the hypothesis says that if we remove the quantization of work into jobs and rather manage to get earning opportunities to better match, correlate with people's willingness to spend and invest, at least so that decreased total demand did not decrease the long-run correlations significantly, many of our economic, social, and environmental problems would be solved or much easier to solve than they are now. If we additionally eliminated the possibility of extortion through private monopolies, we'd have an economic system that is fair, self-stabilizing, sustainable, and independent of growth, but also allowing just as much growth as we really want. Based on economic theory and previous observations, it seems that fixing the root bug and thereby getting rid of this whole job creation paradigm would remove a lot of unnecessary conflict between the traditional left, right, and green political factions and meet the objectives of libertarian, Rawlsian, and even anarchist communist normative premises better than any other currently or previously suggested model. The what part says that we can achieve such a correlation best not with any central planning or force, but through fair supply and demand. The mismatch is a market imperfection, and to fix it, we just need to, firstly, make sharing work legal, socially acceptable, and profitable enough for employers, at least so profitable that they always want to give their employees the option of working less for less pay, and that they rather reduce labor more evenly from a number of employees instead of reducing employees, firing people. And secondly, we'd need to keep it sufficiently unprofitable to save as risk-free monetary assets, in other words, to keep others in debt, compared to investing in real assets or business risk-carrying financial assets.
New research in the journal Science points to one of the main differences between humans and chimpanzees that has let our species dominate the planet, and that is our ability to share. We as humans do this really, really well, whereas our animal counterparts don't. So the question is this: if it's in our genes to share, and that's what has pushed our species to advance the way it has, then why don't we apply the same standards to our economy?
One very sticky assumption is that work can only be shared by force or restrictions. Most economics textbooks directly equate work sharing with shortening the legal work week, the so-called French experiment. The idea of incentivizing sharing to increase individual flexibility in how much to work instead of reducing it does not seem to even cross our minds. What if we could completely decouple the demand for employees from the demand for labor, and thereby employment from the amount of or increase in economic activity? Also, working less in the midterm does not necessarily have to mean shorter work weeks or even require measuring work in hours. For sales staff and mid-management, it can mean fewer clients or areas of responsibility, and for top-level managers and entrepreneurs, it can take the form of sabbaticals or breaks between positions and ventures. The problem is that in our current protectionist labor markets with high recruiting risks, temporary unemployment, voluntary or involuntary, involves a significant risk of long-term unemployment and marginalization. In professions where working less in the short term is very inefficient, the incentives need to make the market function more on a first-out, first-in basis to remove the prisoner's dilemma that is now forcing people to save excessively. Ensuring re-entry possibilities into the labor market is also the best way to facilitate entrepreneurship and creativity, and might eventually make the whole institution of sudden cut-off retirement obsolete.
I'm an artist. I live in New York, and I've been working in advertising ever since I left school, so about 7-8 years now. And it was draining. I worked a lot of late nights, I worked a lot of weekends, and I found myself never having time for all the projects that I wanted to work on my own. And one day I was at work and I saw a talk by Stefan Sagmeister on TED. It was called The Power of Time Off. And he spoke about how every 7 years he takes a year off from work so he could do his own creative projects. And I was instantly inspired.
And I thought it might be helpful to basically cut off 5 of those retirement years and intersperse them in between those working years. What came out of it? I really got close to design again. I had fun. Financially, seen over the long term, it was actually successful because the improved quality, we could ask for higher prices. And probably most importantly, basically everything we've done in the 7 years following the first sabbatical came out of thinking of that one single year.
Typically in America, we've divided our adult life up into 2 sections. There's our work life, where we're productive, and then one day, boom, we retire. In the Okinawan language, there's not even a word for retirement. Instead, there's one word that imbues your entire life, and that word is ikigai. And roughly translated, it means the reason for which you wake up in the morning.
The current version of the how part of the hypothesis says that we can make sharing work profitable by removing all possible legal reduction restrictions and recruiting risks and fixed costs per employee, as well as by implementing continuously progressive employer costs according to the employee's total income. And that we could prevent excessive monetary saving by doing exactly what the central bank has been doing until now, by controlling interest rates to keep inflation stable. We just need to facilitate negative enough real interest rates when there is an oversupply of capital like there is now. This could be done by either eliminating physical cash or by adopting a higher target inflation rate. This would also allow us to put a price on the government guarantee on bank deposits to ensure that it is not profitable for banks to impose more and more risks on taxpayers by over-leveraging themselves. As for monopolies, it's been known for centuries that land as a limited vital resource always has a local monopoly and thereby reaps unearned profits and causes real estate bubbles. The location value of real estate needs to be taxed according to market value to prevent harmful hoarding and inefficient utilization. Additionally, natural monopoly industries where private competition doesn't work can be made sources of public revenue, further reducing the need for harmful transaction taxes, and the government needs to auction out sustainable use quotas for other renewable resources, like fish populations. Each of these parts of the hypothesis is explained in more detail in the book Fixing the Root Bug. Its sister book, The Guilt Economy, Rage Against Our Medieval Money Morals, takes a more socio-cultural and philosophical perspective, showing contradictions in what we consider economically responsible and ethical. How we could say that mankind, ironically, is not so much being destroyed by greed or selfishness, but rather our excessive and unquestioning praise of work, frugality and charitability, which are causing both individuals and nations to fight an invisible but bloody economy war of trying to indebt each other by any means possible. All of this surely sounds ridiculous, and yes, the situation is much more so than you'd think. If you are an artistically oriented person, you may consider the root bug hypothesis just as an inspiring fictive story, like a myth or a piece of science fiction. A tragedy of how mankind was tricked into annihilating itself by its own language and morality, misunderstandings and sticky emotional clicks, parasitic ideas. Ever wondered why we've had so many zombie movies in the recent years? Maybe because we're living one? You surely have your own way of telling this sad but inspiring story, and you can share your versions on the forum, be it a movie, a play, a song, a comic strip, a game, a piece of clothing, or a dance choreography.
in the world that we are creating very quickly, we're going to see more and more things that look like science fiction and fewer things that look like jobs. The thing to keep in mind is that this is absolutely great news. This is the best economic news on the planet these days.
If you are more of an economist, political or human rights activist, a manager, an entrepreneur, an engineer, an ecological researcher or a sociologist, we invite you to take a leap outside the box of corporatism and compromise politics. What if the role of a democratic government was to fix the imperfections of a free market by preventing people from keeping each other involuntarily in debt, and by serving as a common ownership vehicle for natural resources, instead of it being a vessel for interest groups to steal from each other, creating work just to keep people full-time employed and helping existing institutions to preserve their existence at all costs? What if we took a game design perspective into our economic system?
Well, the last decade was the decade of social and the decade of where the framework in which we connect with other people was built. This next decade will be the decade where the game framework is built, where the motivations that we use to actually influence behavior and the framework in which that is constructed is decided upon.
Because gamers can achieve more in online worlds than they can in real life. It's so satisfying to be on the verge of an epic win all the time that we decide to spend all our time in these game worlds. It's just better than reality. For now, it makes perfect sense for gamers to spend more time in virtual worlds than the real world, but it is not by any means an optimal situation. We have to start making the real world work more like a game.
It's already under construction, it's already happening, they just suck. They're not very well designed. We can do better, we can build this better.
They never give you a challenge that you can't achieve, but it is on the verge of what you're capable of, so you have to try hard. But there's no unemployment in World of Warcraft. We feel that we are not as good in reality as we are in games. We can make any future we can imagine, and we can play any games we want. So I say, let the world-changing games begin.
My biggest worry is that we're creating a world where we're going to have glittering technologies embedded in kind of a shabby society and supported by an economy that generates inequality instead of opportunity. But I actually don't think that's what we're going to do. I think we're going to do something a lot better, because I don't believe for a second that we have forgotten how to solve tough challenges, or that we have become too apathetic or hard-hearted to even try.
The best thing you could do would be to falsify the root bug hypothesis. Science progresses with the exploration of myths, in other words, theories and hypotheses, and finding faults in them is the way to make better ones. Why shouldn't that apply to social structures?
When we think about ideas in that way, we usually think about technologies, but there's another class of ideas, the rules that govern how we interact with each other. If we can keep innovating in our space of rules, and particularly innovate in the sense of coming up with rules for changing rules so we don't get stuck with bad rules, then we can keep moving progress forward and truly make the world a better place.
Don't let the skeptic inside you silence the critic. Looking at all that remains unfalsified in the Y basket, it definitely seems at least worth the investigation.